Hello and welcome to the Campus Health Show with, I got it this time, with myself, Nadine, and Dr. Nadine Plummer. Say hello, or otherwise known as Dr. D, sorry. Go ahead.
Hi, my name's Dr. Nadine Plummer, but my friends call me Dr. D. Alden, you're my friend, so you can call me Dr. D and D. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I'm currently filling in at in the Campus Health Center at Dr. Kai ND. Dr. Kai is away on maternity leave. Shout out to Dr. Kai. Congratulations on the new addition to her family. We are located in the Campus Health Center. The Campus Health Center is located in the Campus Recreation and Wellness Center. The Campus Recreation and Wellness Center is located on campus.
Wow.
So in the Campus Health Center, there is a registered massage therapist, there is a physiotherapist, there are chiropractors, there are nurses, MDs, mental health nurses.
You got it. You just worked through it.
And there's a naturopathic doctor, which at the moment is me.
Is you.
Yes.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for being here with me today.
Thank you.
You know what?
We're here. We're here.
Yeah,
we're festive. We're wearing red. We're ready.
It. Okay,
we're ready.
so
yes.
The number one question asked ever
by viewers
period.
As well as yourself.
Everybody in the world.
They're asking now.
What are we talking about today?
Today, I want to talk about obesity and weight loss. Today's actually part one of a two-part series.
I know. Series?
It's a 10-part series.
Oh my God.
This is our first two-part series. So we'll be starting with part one, obesity and weight loss.
Okay. I like it. Yes. Now, obesity and weight loss. I like this, I like this, I like this. Second most asked question. It's almost like it's question 2 on my script.
People are asking right now.
They're asking a lot of questions. Why is it important?
I knew that was the question.
Yeah, I know. It's like you're psychic. I don't know what's going on here.
So you might think a show on obesity and weight loss is a little better or a little more appropriate after January 1st, which is the time where people make their resolutions. But I go with the approach that, knowledge is power. So why don't we give out all the knowledge now, and then you can make decisions based on what you're learning. The other thing is there's a relationship between obesity and stress, and some people find this Christmas season quite stressful, so I want to talk about that relationship today.
I like that. That's a good idea.
Thanks, Phil.
Now, with obesity, what exactly is it?
So the interesting thing is there are several different causes of obesity. So I want to more look at the cause of obesity, and we'll talk about exactly what obesity is, like the definition of obesity in part 2 of the show.
Oh, okay. So the real question is, what causes obesity? I got you.
Yes, several different causes. So these causes are actually thought of as contributing factors.
Okay.
So there's a hormonal factor involved. There's a relationship between obesity and obesogens. And I bet you've never heard of that, but we'll talk about what that is. There's a relationship between obesity and the sympathetic nervous system.
We talked about that before.
Fight or flight, it comes in again. And I know you probably thought we were going to talk about diet and exercise today, which we'll talk about a little later on, but I wanted to kind of approach obesity from a more scientific kind of angle. And we're going to look at it from several different angles, different
So we're at 30 degrees
angles.
Currently.
Yes. We're going to keep on moving.
It's an acute angle. So, now, big thing is, we talked about some of the causes just briefly there. Now, usually you have causes, there's usually effects. Now, what are the risks for obesity?
So there are several different types of risk factors, and when you talk about risk factors, there are 2 different types generally. There are modifiable risk factors. The whole Campus Health Show thing.
I didn't even do it this time.
I know.
It's just you.
I'm doing it instead. Modifiable risk factor is a risk factor that is changeable. Non-modifiable risk factor is a risk factor that you can't change. For example, your race or gender, and you talk about both of those. Risk factors fall into different categories. There are individual risk factors, socioeconomic, and environmental. So I have a list.
I love the list.
Here we go. So individual risk factors include energy intake in excess of energy needs, calorie-dense, nutrient-poor food choices, for example, very sugary food choices, sugar-sweetened beverages, low physical activity, sedentariness, little or excess sleep. We'll talk about that a little bit. Genetics, of course, non-modifiable or questionable. Pre and perinatal exposure, non-modifiable mostly. Certain diseases, for example, Cushing's disease, which we'll touch on a little later on.
Okay.
Psychological conditions, depression, stress. Specific drugs, steroids, some antipsychotic drugs actually have weight gain as a side effect. Socioeconomic factors tend to contribute to obesity, for example, low education, poverty, and some environmental factors, and these are interesting, a lack of access to physical activity resources, low walkability neighborhoods. Food desert. Do you know what a food desert is?
I don't.
It's a geographic area with little to no ready access to healthy food, such as fresh produce or grocery. Viruses, microbiota, very interesting, which we'll talk about next week. Obesogens, which we just mentioned, they're endocrine disrupting chemicals. We'll talk more about them later. And obese social ties.
Okay, wow, that was a big list.
That was the list, yeah.
I'm not going to make you repeat it. I'm not going to make you repeat it because that's going to be tough on you. That's a lot of risk factors.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, like, what are some of the conditions or the diseases that go along with obesity? Because you said diseases and viruses and stuff like that. What exactly, what happened? Like, how?
So these conditions are actually called comorbidities, and basically, if you're obese, then you're at greater risk for these diseases or conditions. Sometimes they go hand in hand, and sometimes they follow one after another. So they are.
Oh, another list.
Type 2 diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia, heart and vascular disease, osteoarthritis, infertility, certain cancers, esophageal, colon, postmenopausal breast cancer, respiratory conditions, diseases, sleep apnea, asthma, liver diseases such as non-alcoholic fatty liver, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, gallstones, trauma treatment or survival, infections, psychological conditions, for example, depression and psychosocial function, physical disability, years of life lost, early mortality, absenteeism, loss of productivity, higher medical costs. So the reason why I think it's important to talk about obesity is because it affects so many different areas of health, and there are so many other contributing factors and comorbidities. So in getting the knowledge out there about obesity, and we'll talk about weight loss as well. We'll talk about that a little more next week. Then it's a way of possibly preventing other comorbidities.
Okay. Well, that's a lot of stuff. Let's do this back to back. I'm proud. That was amazing.
Oh, Dad.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that I didn't make those lists up. They're from an article called The Epidemiology of Obesity, A Big Picture, and it's from the Journal of Pharmacoeconomics.
Wow. Okay. So
yes.
We had mentioned earlier, I say earlier, but it was like 5 minutes ago, not even.
3 minutes.
3 minutes about, yeah.
That's earlier.
We had mentioned about obesogens.
Yes.
What exactly is an obesogen?
So it's interesting because I think there's more talk happening about obesogens. It's like the hot topic, right?
Yeah, so.
Obesogen is a chemical compound that disrupts normal development. It can disrupt the balance of lipid metabolism, and in some cases that can lead to obesity. They're chemicals that inappropriately alter lipid homeostasis. They alter fat storage. They change metabolic set points, disrupt energy balance, modify the regulation of appetite and satiety.
It's just rude.
That promotes the accumulation, fat accumulation and obesity. So there are two hormones that affect appetite and satiety. The hormone affecting appetite is ghrelin or ghrelin, depending on when you...
Greenland's doing this?
Ghrelin. And leptin. And leptin affects your feeling of fullness. And basically alterations to the circulating levels of those hormones suggest that BPA, obesogens are found in BPA, may be able to act, it can interfere with the hormonal control of hunger and satiety. And that is from Current Obesity Reports, an article entitled Endocrine Disruptors and Obesity. So you may have heard of BPA.
I just heard it 2 seconds ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the hot topic.
It is.
It's like
We're talking about it.
we're talking about BPA. Obesogens can be found in BPA. BPA is starting material for the synthesis of plastics.
Okay.
BPA-based plastic is clear. It can be clear and hard and tough. For example, the plastic in water bottles.
Okay.
DVDs,
Yep.
BPA, a softer type of BPA, like resins can be found on sales receipts. So there's like a type of plastic on
Why is
sales
that
receipts.
inside our body?
Now the interesting thing, well, it's exogenous, so it's outside our body, but it can get in our body and affect our hormones.
Stay out.
So the interesting thing about BPA is it kind of mildly mimics estrogen. It's considered, according to the European Chemicals Agency, an endocrine disruptor, meaning a hormone disruptor.
Yep.
And in 2012, the use of BPA was banned in baby bottles. Harms to humans seem to be a topic of debate.
Okay.
So BPA, think plastics.
Okay. Not for our bodies. Now,
Yes.
obesogens in the plastic affects how we break down fat. Is that
Yeah.
kind of correct?
Yes,
Okay.
they can. And I want to bring some awareness to that idea, but that's not really what I'd like to focus the bulk
Okay.
of today's show on.
Oh, okay.
I know we're off and running.
I know.
You're wondering what is the
Sprinting.
bulk of the show.
Yeah.
Sprinting? Like, I'm talking too fast.
No. I'm saying we're covering lots
We're
of ground.
sprinting,
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, no, okay, go ahead.
Okay. So, okay, you were talking about hormones.
Yes.
And how they can affect. How does that all, pan
Tie
out?
in?
Yeah, what's happening here?
So there's so many hormones that are involved in eating and how food is metabolized in our body. And we're not going to talk about them all today. But a few to mention are insulin, thyroid levels, ghrelin, leptin that we just talked about.
ghrelin again?
Ghrelin. It's released, it makes
Yep.
helps to make you hungry. Leptin helps to make you full. Adrenaline.
Oh,
Yes, only a few.
only.
And we're not talking about all of them.
No.
Stay tuned
Don't
for
worry
about
yet.
2 seconds to find out what
Okay.
we're going to focus on.
Here
Yes.
we go. So, hormones affect how we break down or store fat. Am I correct in that statement?
Yes,
Okay.
you are correct.
Solid. 10 points still.
And I want to bring awareness to that idea today, but I
we
really
do.
want to highlight one hormone in particular.
Okay.
And that is a steroid hormone. It's called cortisol. Cortisol is a glucocorticoid. That's the class of hormone that it belongs to.
Okay.
And we're going to focus a little more on cortisol and its relationship with obesity.
Awesome. So, if my script is correct,
Yeah.
we finally got to the meat.
We're in the
We're
meat
at the bulk,
of the matter.
folks. Okay, so
Even for the vegetarians and vegans out there.
it's the meat substitute. We did,
Yeah.
So the meat or meat substitute of the matter.
Yes.
So the heart of today's show. Oh, I like that. What exactly are we talking? How does this all? We talked about a bunch of stuff we might talk about. What exactly are we talking about?
What are we talking about?
What
So
are
I
we
said
talking
that I
about?
wanted to focus on cortisol.
Yes.
And what we're actually focusing on is the central nervous system, its role in hormone release,
Okay.
and obesity.
Okay.
Now, the reason why is we mentioned BPAs in plastics, and we can change some of our those outside environmental factors, but some of them are out of our control. But what is in our control is the way that we respond. Hopefully, it will be in our control. It's an ongoing journey to in the way that we respond to stress, the way that we respond within our own mind-body dynamic.
Okay.
And that brings us to the central nervous system and obesity. And we might have mentioned this a little bit in our stress show, which I think was
We
on
probably did.
October 29th.
We talk about a lot of the stress. So watch the stress show, everybody. Tune in.
But I'd like to unpack it here a little bit so we can really see how obesity ties in.
Okay.
And some of the information that I'm talking about right now is from a 2013 article entitled Stress and Eating Behaviors in the Minerva Endocrinologica Journal.
Wow.
It begins by saying stress is a factor in the development of both addiction and addiction relapse.
True.
Stress can contribute to obesity, and it looks at the relationship also between obesity, lack of sleep, and Yeah, and weight gain.
I agree.
But before we get there,
Hold up.
last week we did talk a bit about the cycle of sugar addiction, the involvement of cravings. We discussed this idea that when you eat certain foods, there's potential for addiction and an addiction response in the brain. So that is one of the ways that stress can lead to weight gain or obesity. I think we have a slide from last week's show.
I think we do.
We also said that when you're tired, then you're less likely to make better decisions. You're more likely to reach for a sugary food. And something that will bring your blood sugar up quickly. So there's an association with fatigue and obesity. But getting back to stress and obesity, I want to bring us back to the central nervous system.
We're back at stress and obesity and central nervous system. Okay, so before we go into that, though, I think we should break for... Hello and welcome back to the Campus Health Show with Dr. D and D and me. Yeah, I thought I'd slow down. Yeah, welcome back. Blah, 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 blah. So, our topic for today is speaking fast as possible. No, realistically, we're talking about obesity and weight loss?
Gain.
Weight gain. The complete opposite of what I just said.
We're talking about right now about stress and obesity.
So before the break, we talked about how this cortisol can lead to gaining weight, correct?
Yeah.
And we talked about how stress can lead to obesity. So how can it?
Okay. Sorry, I just want to say you're right. The show title is Obesity and Weight Loss.
Yes, okay, I thought so.
But right now we're talking about stress and weight gain.
Let's do it.
So how stress can lead to obesity.
How can it?
What I think is cool is we're putting all of the shows together here. See this?
Oh, it's coming together, folks.
Here it comes. The first reason is just based on outside circumstances and our response to those circumstances. So we'd mentioned stress eating, I think maybe during the stress video, and we also mentioned stress eating during last week's video when we talked about emotional eating. So the first way that contributes to obesity is because when people are under duress, they often change their eating patterns and they're more likely to reach for foods that are more sugary, and which we mentioned last week. And if that becomes a pattern, then that can trigger the neurobiological adaptation that we've mentioned before, which is actually like the sugar addiction response. Now, the sugar addiction response or an addiction response involves a part in the brain called the nucleus accumbens.
We talked about it before too, actually.
And that involves the release of dopamine, the laying down of a memory, and that leads to doing the behavior again. So that's like the addiction, the beginning of the addiction cycle. And in terms of eating those sugary foods, that's what happens when you're under stress or duress. And some of that information is also mentioned in the article from the Minerva Endocrinologica journal. Yeah.
You did it.
So,
I'm so proud.
Stress video, we talked about what happens in the body.
Yes.
And one of the systems that's kind of triggered or even like told to go, kind of like a lineup of dominoes, and you hit the first domino and out it goes.
Falls over for me.
We called it the sound the alarm signal. One of those systems was the fight or flight system. And we had said in that video, the stress video, that there are two systems that are actually activated. There's the sympathetic nervous system, and then there's the HPA axis. And at the end of both of these systems being activated, a few hormones are released. There's adrenaline, you could say norepinephrine, epinephrine, and cortisol. I want to focus more on the HPA axis, which ends with the secretion of cortisol, because we're talking about the association of obesity and cortisol. I knew you wouldn't like the word secretion. So let's do a quick review of how that system works and how it ends with the secretion of cortisol. So during times of stress, the HPA axis becomes very active. You can kind of think of it, in my way of understanding it, like a relay race where there's a baton that's passed from one person to another, but it's actually one area in the brain to another. So it starts with the hypothalamus. Hypo as in under. It starts with the well, I couldn't say hippopotamus. Let's say
Start with
hypothalamus. And it's located under the thalamus above the brainstem.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to give a general picture of what it does.
You guys
One
should
of the
draw it on
things
there.
that the hypothalamus does, a general picture. It acts on the pituitary gland, actually the anterior pituitary gland,
Okay.
causing secretion of certain hormones. So after the stress alarm is sent, keep in mind the stress alarm could be anything. It could be a psychological stressor, it could be a physical stressor, it could be fatigue, it could be hunger, it could be anxiety, it could be fear, it could be irritation, it could be anger. It can be a mix match of all of those
That'd
things.
be horrible.
So the stress hormone is sent, and then the hypothalamus secretes CRH, which is corticotrophin releasing hormone. So the stressor occurs, CRH is secreted, and let's think of that as the first baton. So here you are, and the first baton is passed.
Thank you.
To the anterior. You're the anterior
I'm the anterior
pituitary
pituitary
right
gland?
now.
Okay.
Now, in response to getting that,
Where am I running?
then that gland in the brain secretes. You're going to secrete a hormone called ACTH,
God.
adrenocorticotrophic hormone.
Yep.
And that hormone acts on me, I'm somebody else,
Okay,
the
here's
adrenal
another baton.
gland.
Okay.
Now, the adrenal gland receives or is triggered by the adrenocorticotrophic hormone.
Mm-hmm.
And in return, the outside of the adrenal gland, which is called the adrenal cortex, will then secrete something called cortisol.
Okay.
I hope I explained that.
Yep, you got it. You said it all.
That HPA axis ends with the secretion of cortisol.
Okay. So,
Yes.
number 3 question asked by Americans are
Americans
what
and
is
Canadians.
and Canadians. We're all North
And,
America. And South
people
America.
throughout the world.
Everybody, we're inclusive here. What is cortisol?
Yes, so at the end of that process, we just said cortisol is released.
This is cortisol.
There it is. Released.
Released. It's
So,
gone.
yes,
See you later.
cortisol is basically a steroid hormone that's made by your adrenal glands. It does many things, but one of the main things that I wanted to look at is the effect of cortisol on insulin and glucose, because both of those factors can lead to obesity.
Okay.
So basically, cortisol, well, we're going to do a little bit of like a mini biochem lesson now.
Oh
Fun.
my gosh.
Cortisol will induce a process called glycogenolysis.
What is glycogenolysis?
Good one.
I said the word. I did it.
It is glycogenolysis is a process that breaks down glycogen.
Okay.
Glycogen is like a carb that's stored in the liver and the muscle cells.
Awesome.
And the muscle cells, this breakdown of glycogen provides a source of glucose phosphate. It's actually glucose 6-phosphate,
Okay.
which is needed for the process of glycolysis. Okay,
Okay.
what is glycolysis?
What is glycolysis?
Glycolysis is the conversion of glucose into ATP. What is
What is
ATP?
ATP?
ATP is like an energy molecule. It's like a, let's say, an energy or power unit that your body uses, that your body needs for energy. So in this way, the muscle cells have that energy. They get the ATP that's needed for a contraction. So then you can sprint or stay and fight.
Yeah.
So in the liver cell, glycogen is broken down to glucose, so that it
Glucose.
can be released into the bloodstream and taken up by other cells.
Okay.
You asked what is cortisol?
Yes.
And cortisol is also involved in another process called gluconeogenesis.
Okay.
Are you going to ask what is
What is
gluconeogenesis?
gluconeogenesis?
So gluconeogenesis, gluco as in glucose, neo as in new,
New.
genesis as in
Creation, origin.
Yeah,
Got
creation,
it.
origin, generation. So if we put that together, gluconeogenesis is the creation of new glucose, and it's actually created by using some substrates. Like you could think of it as glucose being created by using different ingredients.
Okay.
And those ingredients are pyruvate, lactate, amino acids, glycerol, and glycerols from the breakdown of triglycerides. And those are all put
Okay.
together to create glucose. And then that ends with a lot of glucose in, let's say, sugar in the blood
Okay.
that you would need if you were about to fight, or flight. Cortisol, it also inhibits insulin from effectively acting as an auxiliary to play its role in facilitating the passage of glucose from the bloodstream into the cell.
Okay.
So we're going to try to explain how that works in layman's terms, or in an analogy.
I would appreciate it.
So if you can picture it with me.
Okay.
So basically, insulin is released from the pancreas. It's released from the beta cell in the pancreas.
Okay, pancreas.
Now, insulin and glucose, so let's say they're buddies, and insulin and glucose are in the blood. They come up to the cell, and insulin is the one who has the password. So insulin knocks on the door. In this case, the door is a GLUT4 transporter. It knocks on the door, and it says, hey, my buddy glucose here wants in, and I've got the password. The password is and then the door is open and glucose goes in. And that's how it enters cell.
Wow.
Now, the insulin actually kind of acts like, you could think of it as a key going into a lock. It opens the gate, and then glucose goes in.
Okay.
The problem is that
Here we go.
cortisol actually affects this, and it causes fewer of the GLUT4 transporters to actually appear and come up on the cell membrane.
Okay.
So fewer gates or doors you could think of for glucose to actually enter. This leaves you with a lot of glucose in the bloodstream. Basically, now more sugar is available. That would be fantastic if you were about to sprint. It would be great if you needed it because you're about to knock something, somebody, some animal out. But
Some animal. Come here, tabby cat.
but for
I'm ready.
us, let's say one of the triggers is just an emotional trigger, or it's because you are studying for an exam, or you're preparing for the campus health show and you're feeling a little bit stressed. All that sugar is available, and you're not going to use it all. So
Did you
that
sprint
puts you,
before the show?
No, I sprinted
do you
over.
fight
I sprinted
someone?
over here in the rain.
There you
actually.
go. Then you got it.
I'm
You're
like,
fine.
so that puts you at risk for weight gain.
Okay.
Yes.
Wow. That was a lot of information.
If I could just say one more thing.
Yeah,
Cortisol
definitely.
also suppresses the immune system, contributes to insulin resistance.
Cortisol a jerk.
And there is a syndrome called Cushing syndrome that is when you have excessive exposure to cortisol. And you'll notice that in that syndrome, there's a lot of upper body weight in the upper body. Legs are very thin, lots of upper body obesity, glucose intolerance, hypertension, and I don't want to get too technical, but what I'm getting at is levels of cortisol are high. When they're high, the potential for weight gain is also high.
Okay.
And I've read controversial studies about this. Normally, cortisol is actually measured through the saliva or the blood. But there was a very interesting study where they chose to measure cortisol through hair
Was it on
analysis.
rats?
I think it was on people, actually. It was interesting. No rats. I mean, there are some rat studies that I'll talk about later.
Probably,
But this was a hair analysis. And this, actually, I'll tell you about it in a second. But about the hair analysis, but I want to tell you a little more about how cortisol works.
Okay.
So you'll understand why they chose
Put a pin in the
hair.
study. Yeah.
So basically, cortisol, put a pin on it. Yes, cortisol works where it's high in the morning, then it starts coming down, right? Normally it's high, and then it comes down a little bit by noon, and then a little more at 3, and then it's at its lowest at around midnight.
Okay.
So when cortisol is measured, sometimes with saliva, then they use a 4-point test so they can see it at those different times during the day.
Okay. Wow.
Yes.
That's awesome. Awesome. Now,
Yes.
here we go. Here we go. Another meaty question coming right up. So, could this be why when I wake up for the campus health show, I'm
Oh.
peppy.
Yes.
When I go to my 3 o'clock class, I'm not nearly as peppy.
That is why. That's one of the contributing factors. So as I said, cortisol is normally high in the morning. You wake up and then drops throughout the day, noon, dinner time, lowest point before bed. And you'd want it to be low before bed because
Exactly.
that's when you want to be sleeping. You don't want to have all that energy before bed. So in the study that I'd referred to, they chose to use hair because cortisol fluctuates throughout the day. And it was a study of over 2,500
A lot of
men
hair.
and women. Just,
It's a lot of hair.
and they were looking at the level of cortisol in the hair closest to the scalp, actually about 2 centimeters from the scalp. And
Pulling
that
hair.
represents about 2 months of hair growth, exactly. And they found in that study that when there was more cortisol in the hair, there was an association with greater fat accumulation. It would just be this around the midsection, and those people were more likely to be obese.
Wow.
They also found that the participants who, according to BMI or waist circumference, were obese, they had higher levels of hair cortisol.
Okay.
And they actually measured it over time, and those people with the high hair cortisol had higher levels of obesity. And that study is from a journal called Obesity.
Okay.
And it's a research journal, and the article was called Hair Cortisol and Adiposity in a Population-Based Sample of 2,527 Men and Women. The interesting thing about that study is that the men and women that they did the hair analysis on were a little bit older. They were between the ages of 54 and 87 years old.
It's a heck of a title.
That was a long one, eh?
Yeah.
I'd say so. Now,
Yes.
I think we need one more music break.
Yeah?
So that you can catch your breath. So,
Yes.
here's what's going to happen. We are going to come back to the question of what else can cortisol do? How does it
Okay.
affect the body? So we talked about the study. We're going to talk about how cortisol affects the body afterwards. We're going to go to a music break. We're going to hear Girls Like You by Maroon 5. Hello and welcome back to the Campus Health Show with Dr. D and me, Eldon Atkin. So we're back. Before the break, we had talked about what can cortisol do and how can it affect the body. I guess that's the question we were going to go into.
Yeah.
Now, with that, what else can it do?
So what else does cortisol
What can't it do?
Too much cortisol, as we've been saying, puts you at risk, but for obesity, but not just for obesity, also for high blood pressure, puts you at risk for greater for infections because it affects the immune system.
Okay.
For type 2 diabetes, since it affects the process of insulin in relationship, as we had said, to the GLUT4 transporter. It can cause fatigue, and this is the interesting thing. Too much cortisol can actually impair brain function.
Okay.
So the buildup of cortisol in the brain can shrink the prefrontal cortex. I think during one of our shows we had said the prefrontal, I think it was during the Breaking the Habit show, we talked about the prefrontal cortex, and
Yep.
that's the area in the brain that helps to make decisions. It
Yep.
can shrink the prefrontal cortex, increase the size of the amygdala,
Yep.
and also during that show we said the amygdala was like the emotion center in the brain.
Definitely.
That makes you more prone to responding to stress in a fight or flight way.
Okay.
So it kind of sets you up for
It does.
being having a predisposition to responding to stress like that with fight or flight.
Boom.
Too much cortisol can also cause an overproduction of myelin,
Okay.
producing cells and fewer neurons. This is just a quote from Psychology Today in February 2014. It said, cortisol is believed to create a domino effect. The word domino again.
Yeah.
That hardwires pathways between the hippocampus and the amygdala. The hippocampus, we had said in that other show, I think the Breaking the Habit show, it's involved in memories.
Okay.
The hippocampus and the amygdala, and in creating that pathway, it creates a vicious cycle by
Sounds pretty
creating
vicious.
a brain that is predisposed, as I'd said, to being in a constant state of
Okay.
fight or flight. Constant state of fight or flight means constant state of stress or stress response. Now, chronic stress has the ability to flip a switch in the stem cells that turn them into a type of cell that inhibits connections to the prefrontal cortex,
Okay.
which would improve learning and memory, but it lays down durable scaffolding. You can think laying down tracks that are linked to anxiety, linked
Yeah.
to depression, linked to post-traumatic stress
Well,
disorder.
I can remember things really well,
You-
but I'm also a ball of stress.
You'd remember a little more of that stress response.
Well, that's less fun.
So we mentioned a few things here. Some risk factors for obesity include,
Yes.
we'd mentioned earlier, lack of sleep, obesogens,
Yep.
cortisol levels, the relationship with stress, the relationship between cortisol and obesity.
Yep.
And next week we'll talk a little more about obesity and weight loss.
Definitely.
Obesity and Weight Loss Show Part 2. Tune in Monday morning at 10 a.m. But just in ending this show,
Yep.
okay, let's say wrapping it up because
Yeah,
we're not
'cause we
quite,
still have a little
we're
bit-
not
we have a
quite
little
at
bit
the
left.
end.
Yeah.
Wrapping it up, I want to talk a bit about preventative approach. So
Okay.
now we know about the relationship between obesity and cortisol.
Definitely.
And I guess the question would be, what can we do about it?
What
and we talked
can we
about
do
this
about it?
a little bit during the stress video. We talked about some techniques for reducing
Yeah.
stress. So if there's a relationship between stress, cortisol, and obesity, then a preventative step would be to avoid as much cortisol release somehow as possible.
Okay.
And that would include reducing chronic stress. And remember, stress is a response to stimuli, and so it's not necessarily the outside factor, but it's our own way of responding
Okay.
that makes the difference. So we need to talk about some tools.
Here we go with our tools again. We're going back to the tool shed, everybody.
Here we
now,
are.
what are we going to find in the tool shed? How can we use the tools in the tool shed to reduce what's happening here?
So we could take the approach of reducing cortisol.
Let's go with that. How do
So-
we reduce cortisol?
In order to prevent obesity, to bring down our stress levels, let's address how can we reduce cortisol. There are many different ways.
Okay.
I'll start by saying that you could go see your naturopathic doctor, and naturopathic doctor might be able to, or would be able to help you with a meal plan, with supplements, with stress reduction techniques and tools such as massage, acupuncture. I actually read about a study in 2010 in the Journal of Korean Medicine of acupuncture lowering cortisol. Naturopathic doctors also do counseling. All of those things will lower stress. They can lower cortisol. There are a few other things that you could do. Number one thing,
Number
reduce
one.
stress.
Okay.
Number two, change your diet. And
Okay.
as I said, your ND can help you with a diet. But there's one thing that I read about in a study. Okay, granted, this study was from the Journal of Proteome Research, conducted by researchers at the Nestle Research Center in Lausanne, Switzerland.
Sounds pretty good to me.
Nestle. So it was on dark chocolate.
I love their chocolate.
And what they said was that if you ate, eating the equivalent of one average size dark chocolate candy bar, so 1.4 ounces each day for 2 weeks, in this study they found it reduced the level of the stress hormone cortisol.
So we should just eat dark chocolate. You heard it here first. Eat dark chocolate.
In this study, they found that it reduced cortisol levels, and it reduced the fight or flight hormones known as catecholamines in highly stressed people. Catecholamines, the main catecholamines are epinephrine and norepinephrine, or you
Okay.
could say adrenaline.
Wow.
Other things that you could do: adequate hydration,
Definitely. It's a big one.
sleep. A lack of sleep is known to cause higher levels of cortisol
Okay.
in the blood. Gardening, laughter, exercising. It's interesting because caffeine can affect cortisol levels, so the general rule is no coffee at night.
Okay.
Come up with a good bedtime routine as your cortisol levels kind of dip.
Definitely.
If you notice, I think we had a slide with the kind of the cortisol wave throughout the day. As it dips in that slide, in that diagram, it was dipping like around midnight.
Okay.
So come up with a good bedtime routine. Shortly after midnight, the cortisol actually starts, I believe, it starts going up.
Okay.
Right? So this might be why you're really tired, and maybe, at least I know for me, when I stayed up late, like around 1 o'clock, 12 o'clock, I'm tired. Then around 2 o'clock, I start getting a little more energy. So keep a good bedtime routine. Go to bed when cortisol levels are low,
Okay.
if possible. I know that's not always possible
Exactly.
as a student.
Oh, I know that.
And those are some ways that some tools in reducing cortisol.
Wow. This is a little list today. I like it.
We
Yeah.
had a lot of lists.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunately the end of my script.
So, you know what? I think we did it.
We're done.
We did it.
So usually we end the show
go.
by doing
Here we
a little
go.
bit of an experiment together.
Oh, yes.
During today's show, there aren't too many things we can do. We're not going to be doing acupuncture.
Nope.
We're not going to be doing cupping.
No.
Since we don't have any water
Mm-hmm.
and we don't have any dark chocolate.
That's on you. You could have brought.
I could have brought it. That's true. Last time I brought a muffin.
I know.
Right?
I'll
So
bring
we
dark
could
chocolate.
practice.
I'll bring dark chocolate next week.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't normally eat chocolate.
I love dark chocolate.
But if you brought it, I would eat it. But what I was going to say was, yes, if you came to see your ND, I mean, the list isn't only, this isn't an exhaustive list.
Okay.
There are other ways to reduce cortisol. So if you went to see your ND, they could help with supplements, things that are like more customized for you.
Okay.
But for you, Eldon,
For me.
Now.
Here we go.
here and now. Because we cannot, we don't have water,
Uh-huh.
we don't have dark chocolate, we can't go to sleep here
we
on
could.
air. Wait, how much time is
We
there?
got a little bit. We got a quick nap.
Yeah, a quick nap.
Yeah.
Not going to go to sleep on air. We won't be gardening.
That's too bad.
We're not going to exercise.
That's also too bad.
Not going to drink coffee, and we're not going to come up with a good bedtime routine.
Routine.
And I am a naturopathic doctor, so you could come see me, but you're not actually my patient at the moment, so we couldn't do any. I couldn't customize treatment for you here on air. But there is one thing that I mentioned,
Yeah.
and that's something that we did. I think we did it during the.
I think it was
Stress?
Yeah.
Was it stress
I think
show?
it was during the. Maybe it was. I think it was the SAD show during the
Seasonal affective disorder?
Yeah.
Okay. And the
Here
one
we
thing that we
go.
could do that does reduce stress, and in reducing stress levels, it would reduce cortisol levels, and that is laughter. So I think during that show,
Yep.
not sure, we might have done it during both shows.
Maybe.
There's something called laughter therapy.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to do a little mini version. I'm just seeing how much time we have to laugh.
We got time.
Mini version
we got
of laughter
time.
therapy. There's laughter therapy. There's also laughter yoga.
Yep.
Have you heard of those
Yep.
things? You have?
From you.
From me?
Yep.
So we do two.
Okay.
So basically, we're going to hold hands. Yeah, we're taking it to another level here, Eldon.
Yep. Okay.
So we're going to hold hands
Yep.
because sometimes you would do this, you could do it in a group where
Okay.
everyone's like in a circle holding
Bye-ya.
hands. And you can take, and we'll do two breaths
I gotta
in,
psych
laugh
myself
out,
for
breath
this.
in, laugh out.
Okay.
I have an itchy nose.
Uh-huh.
Okay,
Yeah, uh-huh.
ready?
Yep.
First, do you think we covered everything?
I think we got
before-
everything.
Yeah?
Yeah, we got everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you understand the association?
I do.
Yeah.
Yep.
Between cortisol, stress, obesity.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Before we do this, I just want to say stay tuned next week for part 2 of obesity and weight loss.
Mm-hmm.
So we're wrapping up part 1 now. Ready? Okay.
Nope.
So you take a deep breath in your nose. And laugh out.
You always get me with that. I can't laugh on command.
Let's do it again. Ready?
Okay.
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 So you breathe in and you
Okay.
laugh out.
Oh, my eyes twitching. Okay.
Ready? Here we go.
I can't laugh on command.
Oh, that was good. Your whole face is red.
Oh my god.
So I think I'm squeezing your hands like pretty hard. That
We did it.
is the end of our show.
Okay.
Thank you for watching.
Wow. Okay, so next week, 10 a.m.
Part 2.
Part 2 of obesity and weight loss.
Yes.
And we're going to be here, both of us.
Both of us.
It's our second last episode, I think.
Is it? Oh,
Yeah,
before the break?
Yeah.
Oh, good to know.
So, we'll be back next week, Mondays at 10 a.m. with
Yes.
Dr. D and me. That's Eldon Atkin. And we'll be here, well, again next week. So have a
Next
great
week for part 2.
Stay safe and eat dark chocolate.
See you next week. Bye. Have a good week.